think we got Mosher.
All
Mosher,
right.
what's up, brother?
Hey, guys. How you doing? Apologize for the technical difficulties.
Okay, so we're blaming you?
Yeah, sure.
All right, cool.
You're a UConn guy, right? You're all ready to go tonight?
I'm revved up. I'm ready to go. I'm a little nervous only because, I think every fan is like this, right? When your team is rolling through the tournament and every other game is tight and you're playing a team that sort of has nothing to lose and everybody expects you to win, of course you get a little tight and nervous just about those forces. But, talent for talent, UConn should win tonight. So I'm hoping, I'm praying, I'm excited.
Yeah, well, it's been a wild run for them. We were talking about earlier, like, are they back? Are they here to stay? Like, what are they? Like, what is UConn? And you grew up there. Like, I don't know. Like, are they a blue blood? Are they, like, on the peripheral and the outside looking in? Like, what is that program thought of?
Well, if they win tonight, it's their 5th national championship, and that puts them in pretty rarefied air. Indiana has 5, and then I think Duke has 6. North Carolina's got 8 or 7 or something, and then it's like the untouchable record of UCLA. I think they have like 11 or something. So it really puts UConn, which is only a blue blood, I'd say, since the late 90s. 99 is when they win their first title. It's not as the tradition isn't like North Carolina and Kansas, but if you just go back 25 years now, they're obviously one of the best programs in the country's history. And I think the hiring of Dan Hurley is quintessential in keeping them, getting them back to the level where they're at now, and then keeping them at that upper echelon level. When you get a Jersey City guy and the Hurley name and the impact that he had, him and his father, of course, and his brother, on the New York, New Jersey area where it's such a vital pipeline to be able to get recruits from. I think that's really important, along with the Connecticut getting back into the Big East. They had to get out of the AAC. That was a terrible stretch there. So I think the combination of them getting back into the Big East and hiring Dan Hurley should be the blueprint for them to be a really good team going forward.
Now, is UConn a job that Dan Hurley stays, or does somebody come after him?
Well, I would imagine so. I mean, Jim Calhoun stayed for a long, long time. They'll pay him well. The school has to be able to compete now on an NIL level, which they should be able to do because really, in the Northeast, is there better basketball? I mean, there's great New York City basketball. We'll see what happens with Pitino at St. John's. But if you're in the Connecticut, Boston area and you're a really good basketball player, when I say Connecticut, anything in the Northeast corridor, and you're a big company, and there's a lot of money from Connecticut all the way up to Massachusetts to Maine, and you're a company and you want to, advertise, or you want to get involved with NIL and help your school keep players, I would think that UConn's really not. I mean, I guess Syracuse is the only other team that they compete with, but UConn's been better than Syracuse as a program over the last 25 years. There's no doubt about it.
All right, Geoff Mosher, a proud well, you didn't even go to UConn, but he's from the state of Connecticut, so that's why he's following them. But let's get a little football at 4 here. The new Inside the Birds pod, which dropped this morning. We just heard Kentavious Street, his press conference earlier today. I want to get your thoughts on what his role might be and what are you getting. I mean, if you're just like sight unseen and looked at his numbers, you'd say, okay, this guy's been somewhat productive. So what kind of role do you anticipate for him here in Philadelphia?
Yeah, Mike, I think he has been like a lot of these Eagles free agent signings. He's a guy who has really good abilities and athletic talents and traits, but has had also a bout of injuries that has really sort of disrupted his career. And you can say that about Rashad Penny. You can say that about Greedy Williams. You can say that about a little bit Nick Morrow, who had an injury a couple of years ago, not as much as the other two. And then also there's somebody else that is escaping me right now that has also, Justin Evans, who's also dealt with injuries. But he was a 4th-round pick, and he tore his ACL at his pro day, obviously, and that really kind of set him back. He missed all of 2019 as well, so that by the time he kind of got into it in 2020, he was on a pretty good 49ers team. He just, which has always had a really deep defensive line, so he's been part of that rotation. He's not necessarily been a starter for them. And I don't know that he's going to be a starter here either. He's on a 1-year deal, but he's depth. And when you come from San Francisco and then a year on New Orleans, which is another team that always has a deep defensive line, that's a good resume and that's a good pedigree. And he's going to come in here and if he makes a team, be a part of a rotation. And they like his explosion and his and his burst, which is what the Eagles typically look for in this kind of a player, a defensive tackle. You know, he strikes me as someone who plays sort of the same kind of position that Javon Hargrave and Cox do, which is next to the nose tackle, or whether you want to call that 3 technique or a 5 technique, we'll find out. He's versatile, but he's a piece of the puzzle here, and if he makes the team, he could be a pretty interesting find based on his athletic traits and his history. You know, I think he's probably something that is a little bit better than, say, like a Hassan Ridgeway, who they've had in the past in that regard. But obviously health will dictate, you know, what he's able to do and whether he recognizes all the potential that he had.
What do you think of this defensive line as a unit, you know, especially the interior right now? So Hargrave's gone. You got Jordan Davis, you got Fletcher Cox, you've now got Street, you got Milton Williams. You know, is this a strength? Is this just an average line? Like, when you look at where they are on that defensive front and you know, inside there, are they better than they were a year ago?
Clearly not. I mean, and then, you know, that's only talking right now on April 3rd. It's hard to know how much more improved Jordan Davis will be in year 2. Clearly has a lot of work to do. But if you look at the, as you said, interior line, we're not talking about edge rushers here. We know they're very good on the edges, but the interior line, which last year you've got Fletcher Cox, you got Javon Hargrave, and, you know, Linval Joseph played a pretty important role for them. And then, of course, Ndamukong Suh also coming off the bench playing a good role. That's a pretty solid 1 through 4 right there. And now you're looking at the 1 through 4 and you're saying, well, there's question marks about Jordan Davis, and sure, you're glad to have Fletcher Cox back, and he gives you at least a certain level of play that you're pretty sure is going to be good. But then you've got no idea who's starting in that 3rd spot in the 5-man front on the other side of Jordan Davis, whether it's Milton Williams or a Kentavious Street or whoever they may draft. And even if they draft a guy in the 1st round, you don't know if he's going to be able to make an immediate impact. You have Milton Williams, who will also compete. But, you know, I believe that when they drafted him, they always liked his traits, but felt that he would be at best as a rotational tackle, although he may just wind up winning a starting job anyway. And we'll see there. And, of course, Marlon Tuipulotu, a guy who was hurt at the end of last year. But when he's gotten in, it's not like Marlon Tuipulotu has made tremendous plays and splash plays as a defensive tackle either. So, you know, we mentioned this on the podcast. It's not, you know, the Eagles' interior defensive line that you've come to expect over the last few years. It's certainly way more mediocre than it has been in the past. But we also know that that's just part of turnover and development, and we'll see what it looks like when the first game starts.
Moshe, I want your thoughts on just the offensive line, because Gil and I were talking about this earlier, just as far as depth there and maybe what the Eagles listen, they're always going to look to the trenches, so it wouldn't be a surprise necessarily, but maybe they look for a backup tackle. Maybe they look for, you know, more depth at guard or whatever it may be, but not as deep as they used to be there up front offensively. So just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and it's an area they prioritize. What I'm talking about is depth, as you're referring to. So last year, you know, you had Andre Dillard, you had a former first-round pick as a backup left tackle. Now, there's a reason he was a backup. He hadn't fulfilled that, but he was still a pretty good backup tackle in a league where most teams don't even have a good starting 5, right? So you had that, and you had obviously a good starter in Isaac Seumalo, and now both of those guys are gone, and you're relying on Cam Jurgens, who's never really played right guard, to be able to acclimate to that position. And your only backups then are Jack Driscoll, who I think you're okay with it as a backup tackle. We'll see as a guard if he has to play long stretches of guard. I'm not sure that's best for him. And, of course, you don't really have a good backup left tackle now with Dillard gone. And you know, Fred Johnson was on the practice squad last year. He's you know, re-signed to a deal there, so we'll see if he makes the team. He's got some experience mostly on the right side, I believe, with the Bengals. So it wouldn't surprise me, Ryan, if they wound up scouring the, you know, we call it the late May, June free agent market for some veteran offensive line help just to get in there and fortify the depth that they usually like to have.
Whether it's a wide receiver, like a third wide receiver, or maybe someone in the secondary, what's a position right now that maybe is not getting uber attention or a ton of focus, but you could see, you know, Howie or the front office sort of make it a priority, whether, you know, come draft day or plenty of free agency time still left.
Yeah, you kind of hit on both, and even the linebacker spot. Well, one of the fascinating things about Nick Morrow that we talked about on the podcast this morning, that just kind of we were able to come across last week, at the end of last week, was that he has no guaranteed money in his contract. I mean, this is a guy who had over 100 tackles last year for the Bears, I believe. I mean, he's not a great player. He's not an above-average player. He's a little bit of an overachiever since he was a undrafted free agent, sort of in that T.J. Edwards mold, but not even that good. But still, when you sign someone to a contract in this day and age and they have zero guaranteed money, you either don't have a lot of faith in them and you're trying to add to depth, or you think you're onto something and you're going to get highway robbery out of a player who's going to play a lot of snaps for you. So I think that's fascinating. And we know the history of this team is to sort of scratch and claw at linebacker, but if there's an opportunity to grab one in the trade market or the veteran, I don't know what market we call that day after all the cutdowns are made, final cutdown market coming out of training camp, they'll make a move there. So
which is going to be different this year, Moshe, and I guess that might change some organizational philosophies because they're going to go right from 90 to 53 now. Yeah. So they're going to have to do all that work, in a shorter amount of time on who's out there. But honestly, Mike, they get a pretty good idea going even into camp of which veterans they feel are sort of squarely on the bubble and might become casualties of those cutdowns. And they keep a beat on that pretty well. So I'm not sure that the process itself is going to really alter how they do or their homework on it. But that's an area where I think that they'll have to look. I mean, that's sort of the time period where they got C.J. Gardner-Johnson on the trade market. So we'll have to see that. And then the third wide receiver, I think, is fair. We have a really good story up on our InsideTheBirds.com website. We have an analytics specialist named Sam Finkel, and he did a really nice breakdown of what Quez Watkins did last year and compared to some of the guys who are on the free agent market right now, including Julio Jones and some other guys who are just more natural slot receivers than Quez Watkins. And when you sort of compare what those guys have done in their careers or even last year to what Quez Watkins did last year, and you see the similarity, you think, well, maybe there's an opportunity to still bring in a veteran slot receiver who's a little bit more like cast for that position because they've played the slot more and have that skill set you need. Whereas Quez is more of a field stretcher who's kind of getting shoehorned into the slot. So I think that's certainly an area. And again, the draft, you never know what they're going to come out with in the draft, but that can be upgraded also. Was that you? Were you guys debating like Julio Jones or Quez Watkins? Was that you?
So that was Sam Finkel, our analytics intern, who wrote that and sort of basically compared Julio Jones. Now, he did that in the story. He acknowledged that Julio Jones has never been a slot receiver, but Julio Jones, his ability to play the outside, say in an Eagle scheme, would allow the offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson, the flexibility of moving guys like Devontae Smith and A.J. Brown on certain packages, right, inside, because both of those guys have played interior before and are really real matchup nightmares as slot receivers. So it just gives you flexibility on the 15 to 20% of snaps that Julio might get as a veteran addition.
Moshe, what's the likelihood here that Howie, right, because correct me if I'm wrong, Howie would preferably build his roster as best he can prior to draft time, whether that's through free agency, however else he wants to do it, and then be able to have the luxury to, draft the best available if that's even a possibility. So obviously Eagles have 10 and 30 this year, both in the first round. What's the chances then Howie says, you know what, let me try and bring in Bijan Robinson, whether that's at 10 via trade, however. I think it would be, I don't want to say foolish, but it would be a surprise if he doesn't even attempt to do that.
We talk about this a lot. I never say never. I use the Christian McCaffrey example. The Eagles would have taken him if he was there in 2017, but it's the exception to the rule. And right now, the Eagles aren't in a position where I don't want to say that. I was going to say where they can address the offense at 10th overall when they need so much on defense, because I am a best player available type of guy. So, I mean, I won't slam the door on it, Ryan. Just the history of the organization tells me it's very unlikely.
Yeah. We talked about this earlier, and
I think Howie's changed a little bit too.
Well, the only thing I would say is
Like,
this.
he's
I don't
flashy.
think they would take him at 10, but I do think they may trade back and then think about it. That's all.
I could buy that. I could also, buy Howie really hoping that, he gets a haul and like somebody really wants to move up for Bijan Robinson and is willing to give him a lot of picks. As much as the sexiness of Bijan Robinson on the Eagles makes sense, the whole idea that the Eagles don't have a pick in the 4th, the 5th, or the 6th round, right? Isn't that right?
Yep.
4, 5, 6?
Yep.
Is just like mind-boggling to me.
I would
and
say
he's got to
this.
figure out a way to get some picks.
I think a lot of Eagles fans are hoping, right, that 4 quarterbacks go before pick 10.
Yeah.
But if you're an Eagles fan, should you be hoping a quarterback is on the board at number 10?
Yes. Yeah, B all day long.
Right.
You hope that one of those quarterbacks is still available at 10.
So that
Who
somebody
cares if
behind
yeah.
you calls and says, we want that quarterback, and that's where you get your haul.
100%. 100%.
Maybe I should be
I mean,
a
it's
GM.
great to have an elite prospect pushed down a little bit because 4 go in the top 10. That would be the other byproduct. But I still think that, again, this draft is not like rife with true blue chippers. Even guys like Will Anderson and Jalen Carter have their sort of skeptics, not off the field, just about what kind of players they project to be in the NFL. So if I'm able to collect a haul and capitalize on the draft's depth because it's not loaded with blue chip talent, I'd take that all day long.
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds, the new podcast. Check it out on all the Inside the Birds platforms, InsideTheBirds.com. Of course, right here on Football at 4. Adam Kaplan will be here tomorrow. Mosher will be back on Wednesday. And, of course, more NFL leading you to the draft. And you can listen to the draft April 27th right here on 97.3 ESPN. Geoff Mosher, enjoy the game tonight, man.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.